Pirates. The mere mention evokes images of swashbuckling buccaneers, gold islands full of booty, and steel ringing against sword on the deck. And yet, behind the myth and legend lies a sophisticated, rich, and involved history extending back thousands of years. The piracy of the past is more than just that of those gentlemen and ladies who infested the seas, pillaging and plundering. It's one of survival, revolution, and rise and fall of empires, trade, and war. It is from the ancient Mediterranean to the shores of the New World that pirates have been a part of human history that we conveniently forget. Pirates were not just criminals, but also embodiments of rebellion, cleverness, and lawlessness against the strict, oppressive institutions of society. Oceans never had an opportunity and risk domain. There were a couple of hundred empires and centuries who tried to control the seas so that they could conquer new worlds, conduct business, or for naval supremacy. But behind such powerful empires, there was another set of people as well. Goaded by poverty, uprisings, and the desire for money, pirates carved out their own niche on the seas. And while their activity by necessity places them at odds with great leaders, pirates were also agents of anarchism who allowed other powers to take center stage. But what was piracy in ancient times then? Were they merely bandits? Or were pirates unintentionally the powers which influenced history? From the time of the Phoenicians till the founding of the Roman Empire, pirates played their part in the influence on ancient times. It was a behind-the-scenes role, but genuine, as they disrupted the trade paths, plundered coastal cities, and made empires aware of their vulnerabilities. We journey through the centuries in this series. We'll encounter the lurid and often gory history of the pirates, from their earliest beginnings in the Mediterranean to their Golden Age in the Caribbean. We'll discover how they came and went, how they influenced civilization, and how they became symbols of freedom, rebellion, and adventure. So come aboard with us. Pirates' glory is out there, lost in the depths and in the legends of the past. Your vessel is waiting, for our quest begins today. Piracy is often seen as a symbol of lawlessness. Yet in the ancient Mediterranean world, it was an integral part of the region's dynamic power struggles and trade networks. Long before the term pirate became synonymous with treasure-hunting rogues and swashbuckling adventurers, piracy was a well-established phenomenon practiced by various people seeking to capitalize on the wealth and chaos of others. The roots of piracy can be traced back to the ancient Phoenicians, who were among the earliest sailors to exploit the Mediterranean's vast network of trade routes. The Phoenicians, who hailed from the coastal cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, were known for their advanced seafaring technology and navigation skills. But despite their reputation as skilled merchants, the Phoenicians were also feared for their role as pirates, raiding the coasts of their neighbors and even their allies. This wasn't simply a matter of plunder. It was a calculated response to the strategic necessity of protecting their trade routes and territory from growing threats. But it wasn't just the Phoenicians who were pirating the seas. The ancient Greeks, often romanticized as the champions of civilization and democracy, also turned to piracy when it suited their needs. The early Greeks, particularly in the Aegean and the Ionian Seas, frequently employed pirates as mercenaries or as a means to extend their power. In fact, many Greek city-states, including Athens, engaged in piracy at one point, with the government either turning a blind eye or outright condoning it. The Greeks referred to pirates as laestes, men who lived outside the confines of the law. But not all pirates were outlaws. Some were even legitimized by the state, using piracy as a tool of warfare and expansion. In times of war, pirates served as privateers, raiding the coastal regions of enemy states, capturing goods and prisoners for their rulers. In many instances, this was seen as an extension of diplomacy or a way to undermine enemy resources. The most famous example of such piracy was during the Peloponnesian War, when Athens employed pirate fleets to disrupt the naval power of Sparta. However, piracy in the Mediterranean didn't always operate on the grand scale of state-sponsored raids. Smaller, independent pirate bands began to emerge throughout the region, capitalizing on the constant upheaval in the Mediterranean civilizations. One of the earliest and most infamous pirate strongholds was Cilicia, a region along the southern coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, which became a haven for pirates by the 3rd century BCE. The Cilician pirates, notorious for their cunning and ruthlessness, had a fleet that terrorized the seas for decades, raiding cities and plundering trade vessels. They controlled the eastern Mediterranean and posed a significant challenge to the growing power of Rome. The Cilician pirates weren't simply thieves, they were formidable warriors and tacticians. They captured coastal cities such as Delos and Rhodes, and even seized the island of Crete. At their peak, they had a powerful fleet and strongholds that extended from the Aegean Sea to the Levant. Their raiding tactics were precise, and they were known for their ability to vanish into the mist or strike without warning. Their wealth grew from a mix of plunder, ransom, and the sale of slaves, which were a vital commodity in the ancient world. It was the rise of Rome that would bring a turning point to Mediterranean piracy. As Rome's power grew, so did its naval ambitions. The Romans, eager to assert their control over the seas and protect their vast empire, recognized that piracy was no longer just a nuisance. It was a direct threat to their growing influence. In the 1st century BCE, Rome took a drastic step to eliminate the pirate menace that plagued their trade routes in coastal cities. In 67 BCE, the Roman Senate, alarmed by the growing power of the Cilician pirates and their bold raids on Roman territory, granted Pompey the great unprecedented authority to deal with the pirate problem. This would mark the first organized campaign against piracy in history. Pompey, who had already proven his military prowess in the East, was appointed to lead a vast naval campaign. He was given command of a fleet of over 270 ships and a force of 120,000 men. Pompey's campaign, known as the Piraticum Bellum, war against the pirates, was swift and ruthless. Within 3 months, he had wiped out the Cilician pirate strongholds, secured the Mediterranean trade routes, and captured thousands of pirates, many of whom were enslaved or executed. Pompey's actions marked a significant shift in how piracy was viewed in the Mediterranean. No longer seen merely as a nuisance or a localized activity, piracy now became a serious criminal enterprise that required a massive military response. The defeat of the pirates also served to elevate Rome's naval supremacy, allowing them to control the Mediterranean for the next few centuries. The Mediterranean became known as Mare Nostrum, or Our Seas, a symbol of Rome's dominance over the ancient world. But even after the Roman success in eliminating piracy in the Mediterranean, the legacy of ancient pirates continued to influence future generations. The idea of piracy as both an illicit and heroic pursuit persisted throughout the ages, influencing everything from naval strategies to literature and folklore. The ancient Mediterranean world, with its shifting alliances, burgeoning empires, and constant seafaring, laid the groundwork for centuries of piracy that would follow. The ancient Roman Empire, after securing its control over the Mediterranean, believed it had silenced the threat of piracy for good. However, even though piracy was formally defeated by Pompey in the 1st century BCE, the winds of history never ceased blowing across the seas, and piracy was far from extinguished. The fall of Rome did not bring an end to the pirate menace. Rather, it heralded the beginning of a new era of maritime lawlessness, where different groups exploited the crumbling empire's borders. The rise of the so-called barbarian pirates was a direct consequence of the weakening of Roman authority. In the 5th and 6th centuries CE, as the Western Roman Empire began to crumble under the weight of internal strife and external invasion, the seas once dominated by the Romans became increasingly vulnerable to a new breed of pirates: tribal raiders from the northern and eastern borders of the empire. These pirates were different from the organized Mediterranean raiders of the earlier period. They were motivated not only by the prospect of wealth, but by a desire to destabilize and undermine the waning authority of the Roman Empire itself. One of the most famous pirate groups of this period were the Vandals, a Germanic tribe that had once been pushed to the periphery of the Roman Empire. By the 5th century CE, the Vandals, under the leadership of King Genseric, had established themselves as formidable naval powers. They seized control of North Africa and its coastlines, including the rich city of Carthage, and launched daring raids across the Mediterranean. From 429 CE, Genseric's pirates grew to dominate the Western Mediterranean, and the Vandals even went so far as to capture Rome itself in 455 CE, marking the apex of their power. These pirates, much like the ancient Cilician raiders, saw the sea not as a barrier, but as a gateway to immense wealth and power. They became a symbol of the crumbling Roman order, one where those on the fringes of civilization took advantage of a weakened empire and turned the tides of history in their favor. However, the Vandals were not the only threat to the Romans' maritime superiority. The infamous raids of the Norsemen, or Vikings, were yet to come, but even before the Vikings emerged as a powerful force, there were smaller groups of pirates who contributed to the tumultuous decline of Rome's Western Empire. The most notorious of these were the Saracens' Muslim pirates, who, beginning in the 7th century, expanded their influence across the Mediterranean. The Saracens, originally Arab raiders from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, found themselves on the rise during the early years of the Islamic Caliphate. With the rapid expansion of the Islamic Empire across North Africa, they turned their attention to the Mediterranean, taking advantage of the power vacuum created by Rome's collapse. By the 8th century, these Muslim pirates had seized key strategic points along the Mediterranean coasts, including Sicily, Corsica, and the Balearic Islands. They established pirate strongholds on these islands and began to harass Christian shipping across the entire region. The Saracens were a unique breed of pirate, highly organized, with fleets that rivaled even those of the great Mediterranean empires. They attacked coastal towns, captured prisoners, and took control of trade routes. And in many cases, their raids were both economically devastating and politically humiliating to the Christian kingdoms of Europe. But piracy in the Mediterranean wasn't just a result of the collapse of the Roman Empire or the rise of external forces. It was also a product of the geography and decentralized nature of the Mediterranean world. As the centuries wore on, the region fragmented further, and the balance of power shifted in favor of smaller maritime states and city-states that sought to protect their interests through piracy. In the 11th and 12th centuries, the coastal towns of Italy, Spain, and North Africa began to see a resurgence of piracy, especially as trade flourished across the Mediterranean. Merchant vessels loaded with goods spices, and slaves became prime targets for pirates who had little allegiance to any one nation, but were motivated by the pursuit of wealth and power. The rise of piracy during this period was closely tied to the expansion of trade and the development of maritime networks. With the increasing value of Mediterranean commerce, pirates saw the sea as both a battlefield and an opportunity to seize the spoils of the growing economic exchange. The town of Venice, one of the major powers of the Mediterranean during the Middle Ages, was one of the wealthiest city-states in Europe. However, it was also a target for piracy, as competing maritime powers, including Saracen pirates and even other Italian city-states, sought to disrupt its trade routes. As piracy became more widespread, Europe's great powers responded with both military might and diplomacy. Yet piracy remained a constant threat, particularly in the wake of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of smaller, independent kingdoms that didn't always have the military capability to defend their coastlines. The Mediterranean became a patchwork of conflict, with pirates exploiting every weakness in the naval security of the great maritime states. In the wake of this chaos, the Byzantine Empire, Rome's eastern counterpart, also faced its own pirate problem. With its capital in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire sought to maintain control over the eastern Mediterranean, a critical region for trade and military strategy. However, like their predecessors in Rome, the Byzantines were unable to completely eradicate piracy. In fact, during the 9th and 10th centuries, the empire was forced to rely on both its military fleets and mercenaries to protect its trade routes. Even Byzantine emperors struggled to fully stamp out piracy, which remained a persistent thorn in their side. Piracy in this early medieval period was defined not only by large-scale raids, but by widespread fragmentation of authority across the Mediterranean. It wasn't just the great empires that were in conflict, but a shifting web of smaller states, coastal towns, and trading cities that operated in the vacuum left behind the Roman collapse. Pirates during this time were no longer only bandits. They were agents of change, taking advantage of geopolitical shifts and the decentralization of power. By the 8th century, the northern coasts of Europe witnessed the emergence of one of the most infamous groups of pirates in history, the Vikings. These seafaring Norsemen, hailing from what is now Scandinavia, became synonymous with terror and conquest. Their raids were swift, violent, and destructive, and their influence stretched from the icy fjords of Norway to the fertile plains of England and even the distant shores of North America. The Viking Age, which spanned from the late 8th century to the 11th century, marked a period of unparalleled maritime exploration and expansion. The Vikings, primarily from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, were not just traders or explorers, but also fierce pirates who took advantage of the political and military weaknesses of their neighbors. Unlike the Roman or Greek pirates before them, who were often organized mercenaries or privateers, the Vikings were motivated by a combination of economic need, overpopulation, and a fierce warrior culture that glorified combat and raiding. The Viking raids began with the infamous attack on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 CE. Located off the northeastern coast of England, Lindisfarne was an important religious site, home to many treasures and relics. The Vikings arrived with brutal efficiency, and their attack shocked the Christian world. The monastery was plundered, and many monks were killed or taken captive. This raid marked the beginning of a series of Viking incursions across the British Isles, which would last for more than 2 centuries. What set the Vikings apart from other pirates was their remarkable naval technology and their ability to traverse vast distances. Their longships were light, flexible, and fast, allowing them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. These ships could swiftly strike coastal villages and towns, loot their wealth, and disappear before the local defenders had a chance to respond. Viking raids were not limited to Britain. They extended across Europe, targeting France, Spain, Ireland, and even the Mediterranean coasts. Their reach was truly global for their time, and they became a scourge of the known world. The Vikings' raids were often in pursuit of loot, but they were also driven by a desire to establish new territories. In 841 CE, the Viking chieftains launched a massive raid on the French coast, and by 845 CE, they had captured Paris. The French, unable to mount an effective defense, were forced to pay a ransom to the Viking leader Ragnar Lodbrok to spare the city. This event, along with other successful Viking campaigns, solidified the Vikings as a dominant force in the early medieval period. Yet, the Viking impact was not purely destructive. As the raids continued, many Vikings began to settle in the lands they had once plundered. The Norsemen established the Danelaw, a Viking-controlled region in England, and Viking settlements flourished across Ireland and the northern coasts of France. In Normandy, the Norsemen, later known as the Normans, were granted land by the French king. And over time, they assimilated into local cultures, transforming from pirates to powerful rulers. In the Mediterranean, the Vikings' presence was also felt. While they are best known for their raids on England and France, the Vikings ventured into southern seas as well. By the 10th century, Norse pirate bands were operating along the coasts of Spain and Italy, capturing ships and engaging in raids. The Vikings even sacked the Italian city of Bari in 847 CE, further establishing their reputation as fierce raiders of the Mediterranean. However, the Viking Age was not solely about piracy and raiding. As the centuries passed, the Norsemen transitioned from pirates to traders and explorers. Their raids had been motivated, in part, by a desire for wealth and resources, but many Viking chieftains soon realized that trade could be just as profitable, if not more so than plundering. The Vikings began to establish trading routes that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Middle East, exchanging furs, timber, and slaves for luxury goods such as silver, silk, and spices. Perhaps the most famous Viking explorer of all was Leif Erikson, who around 1000 CE reached the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. Eriksson's voyages were a part of the larger story of Viking expansion into new territories. Although the Vikings never permanently colonized North America, they established short-lived settlements in what is now Newfoundland, Canada, creating a lasting legacy of exploration and discovery. The Vikings, though still known for their raids, gradually transitioned into a more organized society. By the 11th century, Viking kingdoms such as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden had consolidated power, and the practice of piracy began to wane. However, the legacy of Viking piracy and exploration would continue to influence European history for centuries to come. The Normans, descendants of Viking settlers in France, would later play a pivotal role in the conquest of England in 1066 CE under William the Conqueror. Despite their transition into established rulers and traders, the Viking pirates of the early medieval period remain a symbol of the dangerous and dynamic nature of piracy during this era. They were a unique breed of pirate, both feared and admired, destructive and creative. Their ability to navigate both the known world and the unknown was unparalleled, and their raids and explorations helped shape the course of European and world history. As the Viking Age drew to a close, piracy did not disappear. Instead, it evolved into new forms, especially in the Mediterranean and along the coasts of Europe. The legacy of the Viking pirate, with his fearsome reputation, skilled seafaring, and desire for conquest, would live on in the legends and stories that would inspire generations of sailors, warriors, and adventurers. By the 16th and 17th centuries, a new kind of piracy emerged, one that would come to be known as the Golden Age of Piracy. This period, which spanned from roughly the 1650s to the 1730s, marked the peak of maritime lawlessness, where pirates, privateers, and buccaneers thrived on the high seas. This was the time of Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, and a host of other infamous pirates who captured the imagination of the world with their daring exploits. The rise of piracy during this period was directly tied to the expanding global trade networks and the maritime empires of Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands. The 16th and 17th centuries saw the establishment of vast colonial empires across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. With this came the burgeoning transatlantic trade in gold, silver, sugar, tobacco, and slaves, all of which provided lucrative targets for pirates. The wealth of the Spanish Empire, in particular, made it an irresistible target for pirates looking to plunder the treasures flowing from the New World to Spain. Piracy during the Golden Age was closely linked to the rise of privateering, a form of legalized piracy. Many European nations, particularly England and France, issued letters of marque, granting privateers official permission to raid the ships of their enemies. These privateers were essentially pirates with a government endorsement, sanctioned to attack enemy vessels and claim their cargo as spoils of war. While the actions of privateers were often seen as patriotic, they blurred the lines between legal commerce and criminal activity. Privateers like Sir Francis Drake became national heroes, while others, like the infamous pirate Bartholomew Roberts, operated outside the law, taking advantage of the chaos of war to line their pockets. As the century wore on, piracy began to shift from a state-sanctioned activity to a more organized and autonomous form of lawlessness. The Caribbean became a hotbed of piracy, with pirates like Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, and Charles Vane preying upon the merchant ships carrying goods from the Americas to Europe. The pirates of the Caribbean were particularly notorious for their use of terror to intimidate and control their targets. Blackbeard, with his towering figure, thick black beard, and penchant for lighting fuses in his beard to create a terrifying cloud of smoke, became the epitome of pirate menace. The pirates of this golden age operated according to their own codes of conduct. Unlike the chaotic and disorganized raiders of earlier centuries, these pirates often formed democratic crews, where each member had a say in the actions of the ship. They had rules often called the Pirate Code, which governed everything from the division of loot to the treatment of prisoners. A pirate's share of the loot was often based on his rank and contribution, with the captain receiving a larger share and the crew receiving a smaller portion. However, pirates also had a system of equality, where even the lowest-ranking members of the crew were given a voice in the decision-making process. Pirates often targeted Spanish galleons, which were heavily laden with treasures from the Americas. These ships, part of Spain's vast colonial empire, were slow-moving and often poorly defended, making them prime targets for fast-moving pirate ships. Pirate crews would raid these vessels, taking gold, silver, and other valuable goods, and then disappear into the many islands and coves of the Caribbean, where they could lay low and wait for the next opportunity. These pirate havens, such as Nassau in the Bahamas, became infamous for harboring pirate crews who were immune to the law. The British colonies, in particular, became a breeding ground for piracy. The Caribbean, with its wealth of sugar and tobacco plantations, was a treasure trove for pirates. The British Empire, although officially condemning piracy, had a complicated relationship with it. The British Navy would occasionally hunt down pirates, but the pirates often had powerful backers who were willing to turn a blind eye to their activities. Some of these pirates, such as Henry Morgan, even went on to become respected figures in society. Morgan, a Welsh privateer, became notorious for his raids on Spanish settlements in the Caribbean. After a series of successful attacks, including the infamous sacking of Panama in 1671, Morgan was knighted by the English crown and became the lieutenant governor of Jamaica, a testament to the blurry line between piracy and legitimate warfare. Despite their success, the pirates of the Golden Age were not invincible. As the 18th century progressed, European powers began to crack down on piracy. The British Navy, in particular, launched a concerted effort to eradicate piracy in the Caribbean and along the American coastlines. In 1718, the British Navy, led by Commodore Woodes Rogers, began to take a more aggressive stance against pirates in the Caribbean. By the 1720s, many of the most famous pirates of the Golden Age, including Blackbeard and Charles Vane, were either killed or captured, marking the end of the pirate era in the Caribbean. However, the legacy of the Golden Age of piracy lives on. The pirates of the Caribbean, with their swashbuckling adventures, their buried treasures, and their defiance of the established order, have become cultural icons. From the fictional tales of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to the blockbuster Pirates of the Caribbean films, the image of the pirate as a bold, rebellious figure remains entrenched in popular culture. The Golden Age of piracy was not just a time of maritime lawlessness, but a time when pirates helped shape the global trade routes and brought attention to the power struggles between the colonial powers of the 17th and 18th centuries. As Europe expanded its empires, the pirates fought back in their own way through disruption, violence, and their own brand of justice on the high seas. As the 18th century drew to a close, piracy, once a dominant force on the high seas, began its slow decline. The forces that had once allowed pirates to thrive, the vast, poorly defended empires, the overworked colonial navies, and the relatively low levels of international law enforcement, were gradually being replaced by more organized, efficient, and professional systems. The rise of powerful naval fleets increased international cooperation, and the decline of the lucrative maritime trade routes gradually pushed piracy into the history books. However, while piracy as a widespread and organized phenomenon would fade, its legacy would persist in new forms, both in the Caribbean and around the globe. The first major blow to piracy came with the establishment of stronger national navies. By the mid-18th century, European powers like Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands had begun to build and maintain formidable naval fleets. The British Royal Navy, in particular, emerged as the world's most powerful naval force, with ships designed for both warfare and patrol of the high seas. These naval forces were better equipped and better trained than the pirate crews they sought to destroy, and they began to aggressively patrol the waters once frequented by pirates. The British Navy's efforts were compounded by the increased international cooperation against piracy. European powers began to realize that piracy, while sometimes a minor nuisance, could be a threat to their own trade routes and economic interests. By the early 18th century, many countries, including Spain and France, had established joint patrols to secure their colonies and suppress pirates. The collaboration between these nations was crucial in ending piracy's golden years. With more frequent and organized naval patrols, pirates found it increasingly difficult to operate with the same freedom they had once enjoyed. The British Navy's efforts in the Caribbean, in particular, were key in diminishing the power of the pirates. British officers like Commodore Woodes Rogers led extensive campaigns against pirate havens such as Nassau and the Bahamas. As a former pirate himself, Rogers was uniquely positioned to understand the pirate mindset and use it to his advantage. His campaign to rid the Caribbean of pirates succeeded, and by the 1720s, many of the notorious pirates like Blackbeard were either killed or captured. The decline of piracy was also helped by the changing nature of trade. The rise of more efficient, larger, and faster ships, as well as more robust merchant practices, made the piracy business less profitable. The flow of treasure from the Americas to Europe, which had been one of the main targets for pirates, began to slow as European empires started to extract resources in more secure, controlled ways. The increasing size and armament of merchant vessels, along with better coordination and protection by naval convoys, further limited the opportunities for piracy. In addition, many former pirates, recognizing the tightening grip of international navies and the diminishing returns of their activities, turned to more legitimate occupations. For example, the famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts, often regarded as one of the most successful pirates in the Golden Age, was killed in 1722. After his death, the remaining pirates of the era saw their numbers and influence dwindle significantly. Pirate havens, once bustling with outlaws, were abandoned or transformed into more lawful trading hubs as the colonies grew and established more rigorous control over the territories. The decline of piracy didn't mark the end of maritime violence altogether, however. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, piracy continued in various forms, though it became far less organized and less powerful. Piracy in the Caribbean all but disappeared by the mid-18th century, but piracy continued to persist in other parts of the world. In particular, piracy in the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Africa, and in Southeast Asia became increasingly common in the 19th century, fueled by trade in spices, opium, and other valuable goods. One of the most notable pirate hotspots in the 19th century was the Barbary coast of North Africa. The Barbary pirates, often called corsairs, operated along the coast of present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. These pirates were primarily Muslim, and their main targets were European and American merchant ships. They were infamous for their raids on ships and coastal settlements, and they also engaged in the practice of enslaving captives. European powers, including Britain, France, and Spain, frequently sent naval expeditions to combat the Barbary pirates. The United States, in particular, fought the Barbary Wars between 1801 and 1815, which were instrumental in reducing the power of the Barbary corsairs. While piracy was no longer the same organized threat it once was, it didn't disappear entirely. The 19th century saw sporadic instances of piracy, often tied to regional conflicts or lawlessness. For example, piracy was a persistent problem in the waters around the Malay archipelago, where pirates would attack merchant vessels passing through the Strait of Malacca. However, by the end of the 19th century, European colonial powers had effectively suppressed piracy in most of the world's oceans, and piracy was no longer seen as a major threat to global trade. In the 20th century, piracy largely became a relic of the past in terms of organized, high-profile attacks. However, piracy didn't entirely vanish. In fact, some modern instances of piracy, such as those in the waters off the coast of Somalia in the 21st century, reminisce of the piracy of old. The rise of piracy in Somalia, for example, was driven by the collapse of the Somali government poverty, and the decline of effective law enforcement in the region. Somali pirates, armed with modern weaponry and fast boats, began targeting commercial vessels and holding them for ransom. While the pirates of the 21st century have technological advantages that their historical counterparts lacked, their motivations and methods are eerily similar to those of their predecessors. Despite these modern occurrences of piracy, the era of piracy as a dominant force on the high seas has long since passed. Global trade, increased international cooperation, and the rise of modern naval forces have reduced piracy to a problem that can be isolated and dealt with through coordinated security efforts. The old days of Blackbeard and Captain Kidd are long gone, but the legacy of piracy filled with adventure, lawlessness, and the thrill of the high seas remains a captivating and enduring part of history. While piracy seemed to fade into history by the 20th century, the 21st century has witnessed a surprising resurgence in certain parts of the world. Modern piracy, while no longer the larger-scale swashbuckling affair of the Golden Age, continues to pose a significant threat to international shipping and global trade. This new era of piracy, often driven by socio-political instability and economic desperation, has taken on a different form, yet still bears some striking resemblances to earlier counterparts in terms of tactics and motivations. In the early 2000s, one of the most well-known and active regions for modern piracy was off the coast of Somalia. The collapse of the Somali government in the early 1990s left the country in a state of lawlessness, creating an environment ripe for piracy. With no effective central authority, Somali pirates turned to hijacking commercial ships, primarily targeting vessels passing through the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea. These pirates were often armed with AK-47 rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, using high-speed skiffs to chase down slower-moving cargo ships. The primary motive for Somali piracy was financial gain. Pirates typically demanded huge ransoms for the release of hijacked vessels and their crews, with some ransom payments reaching millions of dollars. The pirates often operated in groups, with motherships providing support to smaller, faster boats used for the attacks. After successfully boarding a ship, pirates would hold the crew and cargo hostage, negotiating with the ship's owners or governments for the release. The hijacked ships were then used as leverage in these high-stakes ransom negotiations. Pirates would also raid the ships for valuable cargo, including oil, food, and electronics. The rise of Somali piracy prompted the international community to take action. Navies from the United States, the European Union, and other countries, as well as private security companies, began to patrol the waters off the coast of Somalia. International naval operations such as NATO's Operation Ocean Shield and the European Union's Operation Atalanta aimed to disrupt the pirates' operation and ensure the safe passage of commercial vessels. These efforts, combined with an increase in armed guards on commercial ships and the use of technology like satellite tracking, gradually reduced the incidence of piracy in the region. However, despite the decline in Somali piracy by the mid-2010s, modern piracy remains a persistent problem in other regions of the world, particularly in Southeast Asia and West Africa. The waters off the coast of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are still hotspots for piracy. Here, pirates often engage in violent, opportunistic attacks on smaller vessels or attack in groups to overpower larger, more heavily guarded ships. These attacks are usually motivated by theft, with pirates targeting cash, valuables, or even the ships themselves, which can then be sold for scrap. In West Africa, The Gulf of Guinea has become another major center of piracy, with Nigeria being one of the countries most affected. Piracy in this region is often carried out by heavily armed criminal gangs who hijack vessels to steal cargo, particularly oil, or to take hostages for ransom. The Gulf of Guinea has become one of the most dangerous areas for seafarers, with many attacks taking place in Nigerian waters. The pirates in this region are often linked to organized crime syndicates, and the ransoms demanded can be astronomical. Modern pirates in these regions employ many of the same tactics as their 17th and 18th century counterparts, though with the use of modern technology. The pirates often board ships under the cover of night or in areas where naval patrols are minimal, using speedboats or even larger vessels to approach their targets. They rely on the element of surprise and the speed with which they can board and overpower a crew, often using guns or knives to intimidate their victims. Unlike the pirates of the Golden Age, who were often motivated by a desire for personal freedom or revenge against a corrupt system, modern pirates tend to be driven by economic necessity. Many of them come from regions suffering from extreme poverty, instability, and a lack of opportunities. The collapse of state structures, weak enforcement of maritime law, and a lack of economic development in these regions create fertile ground for piracy to thrive. In some cases, piracy is seen as one of the few ways to survive in an otherwise harsh environment. Another key difference between modern piracy and its earlier forms is the increased use of technology. Pirates in the modern age have access to satellite phones, GPS systems, and advanced weapons, allowing them to plan and execute attacks with greater precision. These pirates often track shipping routes and monitor weather conditions to identify the most vulnerable targets. They also use modern communication networks to demand ransoms and negotiate with ship owners or governments. The ability to communicate quickly and across great distances has made modern piracy more organized and efficient than ever before. Despite the rise of modern piracy, the efforts to combat it have also evolved. International cooperation between naval forces, private security firms, and shipping companies has become crucial in reducing piracy's impact. Naval patrols in piracy hotspots, armed guards on ships, and the use of non-lethal deterrents such as water cannons and electric fences have been employed to protect vessels. At the same time, the international community has taken steps to address the root causes of piracy by promoting economic development and stability in regions prone to piracy. The fight against modern piracy is ongoing, and the piracy of today bears little resemblance to the romanticized versions that were portrayed in Hollywood films and novels. Today's pirates are a response to the socio-political and economic conditions in which they operate. While piracy may never completely vanish, international efforts continue to keep it in check, ensuring that the age of piracy is relegated to the past. The legacy of piracy, however, persists in both popular culture and the maritime world. The images of pirates of treasure chests buried in distant lands, of rugged individuals with swashbuckling attitudes and colorful personalities, continue to captivate the imagination. But beyond the romanticized versions of pirate life, there remains a harsh reality of violence, crime, and the struggle for survival on the high seas. The story of piracy, despite its decline and the eventual suppression of pirate fleets, has left an indelible mark on global culture. The enduring legacy of pirates is not just confined to history books or the accounts of daring naval battles. The idea of pirates, those rebellious, freedom-seeking outlaws of the sea, has been romanticized, mythologized, and commercialized in ways that extend far beyond their actual historical existence. One of the most lasting impacts pirates have had is on popular culture. The image of the pirate, complete with the eye patch, tricorn hat, and swaggering attitude, has become a symbol of adventure, rebellion, and freedom. This image is largely shaped by literature, film, and later, video games and theme parks. The works of authors like Robert Louis Stevenson, whose novel Treasure Island remains one of the most enduring representations of pirate life, helped to solidify the pirate as a central figure in the Western imagination. Stevenson's creation of characters like Long John Silver and Jim Hawkins has become archetypal, representing the classic dynamics between the adventurous young hero and the morally ambiguous pirate captain. While Stevenson's Treasure Island laid the groundwork, it was the burgeoning film industry in the 20th century that truly cemented the modern-day pirate's place in popular culture. In particular, Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise, starting in 2003, became one of the most successful and influential representations of pirates in contemporary culture. Johnny Depp's portrayal of Captain Jack Sparrow, a lovable, eccentric rogue, brought a new, lighthearted take on pirate mythology. One that both celebrated and lampooned the notions of pirates as heroic adventurers. The franchise became a cultural phenomenon, drawing millions of fans, reviving interest in pirate lore, and influencing everything from fashion to tourism. The Pirates of the Caribbean films fueled a renewed interest in pirate-themed amusement parks and tourist attractions, with Disney's theme parks offering pirate-centric rides like Pirates of the Caribbean, which itself became a cultural symbol. The ride, originally debuting in Disneyland in 1967, was expanded and updated to reflect the growing popularity of pirate films and stories, blending history with the fantastical elements of modern cinema. In many ways, this theme park attraction has become a touchstone of how pirates are perceived today, not as the ruthless criminals of history, but as symbols of a swashbuckling, carefree lifestyle. Beyond literature and film, pirates have also found a home in popular music. The image of the pirate was adopted by various musicians and bands over the years, often evoking themes of rebellion and freedom. The music genre known as pirate folk has even emerged, with bands and performers embracing pirate aesthetics, such as sea shanties and pirate-themed performances. The annual Talk Like a Pirate Day, which takes place every September 19th, is a playful way to celebrate the enduring appeal of pirates, as people around the world don pirate costumes and adopt their iconic slang for the day. Pirates, too, have been embraced in the realm of gaming. From classic arcade games to modern-day digital worlds, pirates are central characters in many video games. Sid Meier's Pirates, 1987, is one of the most famous examples, allowing players to assume the role of a pirate captain navigating the Caribbean. The game's combination of swashbuckling action and strategic gameplay made it a favorite for generations of gamers. Similarly, Sea of Thieves 2018, a multiplayer online adventure game, further cements the appeal of pirates in modern virtual spaces, with players taking on the roles of pirates in a beautifully crafted open-world game environment. Through these interactive mediums, players can live out the pirate life and explore virtual seas, engaging in piracy, treasure hunting, and navigating conflicts between rival pirate crews. However, beyond pop culture, the legacy of piracy also has more serious implications. The romanticized image of pirates has at times obscured the brutal reality of pirate life, which often involve violence, slavery, and exploitation. Pirates in the Golden Age often were not the jolly adventurers depicted in fiction, but rather violent criminals who preyed on the weak. Yet the myth of pirates as rebels against tyranny, standing up for the oppressed, remains a significant part of the allure. In some ways, this image of pirates as freedom fighters or anti-heroes aligns with broader cultural narratives around the rejection of oppressive power structures. This enduring myth of piracy as a symbol of resistance can also be seen in more modern movements. In some parts of the world, the pirate becomes a symbol for those resisting colonialism, imperialism, or exploitation. For example, the Somali pirates of the 21st century, while seen by many as criminals, have been portrayed by some as defending their country's waters from illegal foreign fishing vessels and toxic waste dumping. Though their methods of raiding ships and holding hostages are clearly criminal, their motivations often stem from a sense of economic injustice and territorial defense, a modern manifestation of piracy's historical legacy. Pirates' influence on the development of modern maritime law is also worth noting. Today, international law recognizes piracy as a universal crime that any nation may prosecute, regardless of where the piracy occurs. This principle of universal jurisdiction arose in part from the need to address the threat of piracy in the 18th and 19th centuries. The suppression of piracy has, over time, become an essential part of international law enforcement, culminating in multinational efforts to combat piracy in regions like the Horn of Africa and Southeast Asia. The fight against piracy has also led to the development of new naval tactics, security measures for shipping companies, and specialized counter-piracy units, all of which reflect the lasting influence of piracy on modern security and global trade. Pirates have thus left their mark not only in history, but also in the world of law, culture, and economics. Their legend, both real and imagined, continues to captivate us, shaping everything from our ideas about freedom and rebellion to how we protect our world's vast oceans. In their own way, pirates have become symbols of a complicated, romanticized past, a reminder of both the dangers of the sea and the allure of adventure on the high seas. As we look ahead to the future, the shadow of piracy continues to loom over global maritime trade. While the image of pirates as treasure-seeking outlaws may belong to the past, modern piracy is far from over. With advances in technology and the ever-changing geopolitical landscape, piracy's role on the global stage is evolving. Today, piracy is not just confined to the high seas. It has found new footholds in the digital realm and in the politically unstable waters of the world. The rise of technology, especially in the digital era, has led to new forms of piracy, including cyber piracy. Just as physical piracy targets ships and crews, cyber pirates target the digital infrastructure that underpins the modern global economy. Cyber attacks on shipping companies, ports, and logistics firms have become increasingly common. In 2017, for instance, the NotPetya malware attack hit several Ukrainian institutions, but its effects quickly spread, crippling companies around the world, including major shipping lines. Such attacks highlight the vulnerabilities in the digital systems that manage cargo, shipping logistics, and port operations. In response, governments and industries have ramped up efforts to secure their digital infrastructure. The shipping industry in particular has become a prime target for cybercriminals due to its reliance on outdated systems and its vital importance to global trade. In some cases, pirates have targeted maritime shipping lanes by attacking the navigation systems of ships, either for ransom or to hijack cargo. The combination of high-tech methods and traditional piracy tactics makes combating these modern pirates even more difficult. Furthermore, environmental and political factors contribute to the persistence of piracy. regions of the world that suffer from political instability, economic hardship, and weak governance remain prime breeding grounds for piracy. The waters off the coast of Somalia may no longer be as dangerous as they once were, but piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, Southeast Asia, and the Strait of Malacca remains a significant concern. Economic inequality, the collapse of state structures, and the failure of law enforcement are often at the root of modern piracy. As long as these conditions persist, piracy will continue to thrive in certain parts of the world. The Gulf of Guinea, which we mentioned earlier, has emerged as one of the deadliest areas for piracy in recent years. Here, pirates focus not only on hijacking vessels, but also on stealing oil and kidnapping crew members for ransom. The high demand for oil has made this region a prime target for criminal gangs who have access to weapons and maritime vessels. The attacks in this region are often violent, and the pirates are highly organized, often using sophisticated techniques to board ships and evade capture. Despite efforts by regional governments and international organizations to curb these attacks, piracy in the Gulf of Guinea remains an ongoing threat. Similarly, piracy off the coast of Southeast Asia continues to be a persistent problem. The waters surrounding Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are among the most vulnerable to pirate attacks. The relatively shallow waters and busy shipping lanes in this region make it an ideal location for piracy. In Southeast Asia, pirates often focus on robbing ships of their cargo, with the stolen goods sometimes sold on the black market. In recent years, there have been numerous attacks on tankers, bulk carriers, and container ships, many of which have resulted in the theft of valuable goods or the hijacking of vessels for ransom. The international community has responded to this growing threat by increasing cooperation and maritime security measures. Organizations like the International Maritime Organization, IMO, and the United Nations have taken steps to implement regulations and establish guidelines to combat piracy on a global scale. For instance, the IMO has introduced the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, ISPS, which sets standards for ships and port facilities to prevent piracy and terrorist attacks. Furthermore, countries have been working together to patrol high-risk areas, often launching coordinated naval operations to ensure the safety of shipping routes. Despite these efforts, the question remains: can piracy fully be eradicated? While the coordinated efforts of international naval forces have significantly reduced piracy in some regions, the underlying causes of piracy, poverty, political instability, and the lack of rule of law remain entrenched in many areas. These issues will need to be addressed if piracy is to be fully eliminated. Economic development, the strengthening of governance structures, and the creation of sustainable livelihoods for people living in piracy-prone regions are crucial to addressing the root causes of piracy. In the meantime, piracy will continue to adapt, evolving with the times and exploiting new opportunities for profit. With the growing importance of cybersecurity, the line between traditional maritime piracy and cyber piracy will blur even further. The digitalization of the global economy and the increasing reliance on automated systems in shipping and logistics make the industry more vulnerable to attacks. As such, piracy will likely not disappear, but rather transform and become increasingly difficult to combat. Looking to the future, there are some encouraging signs. As awareness of modern piracy grows, so too do international efforts to address the problem. Countries around the world are investing in better maritime security technologies, and private sector initiatives, such as the use of armed guards aboard ships, are being implemented to protect vessels from pirate attacks. Additionally, regional cooperation in areas like the Gulf of Guinea and Southeast Asia is improving, with countries working together to crack down on piracy and ensure the safety of shipping routes. Piracy, both ancient and modern, serves as a reminder of the dangers and complexities of maritime trade. In ancient times, pirates were a persistent threat on the high seas, their exploits shaping history and folklore. Today, piracy may look different, more sophisticated, more technologically advanced, but it is still a force that disrupts the global economy, jeopardizes the safety of seafarers, and highlights the ongoing struggle for power and wealth in a world that remains interconnected by the sea. As we conclude our journey through the tumultuous history of piracy, from its ancient origins to the modern-day threats, it becomes clear that pirates, in all their varied forms, have had a profound impact on the world. Their stories, both real and mythical, have been woven into the fabric of global culture, shaping our perceptions of rebellion, freedom, and adventure. From the fearsome pirates of antiquity who disrupted the Mediterranean, to the swashbuckling figures of the Golden Age of Piracy, and even to the cyber pirates of today, piracy has proven to be a timeless element of human history. But while the romanticized image of pirates, those daring, lawless adventurers, remains firmly entrenched in the public imagination, it's crucial to remember the darker, often brutal reality of their existence. Pirates were not simply rebellious heroes, they were criminals driven by desperation, greed, and the quest for survival. Their actions left an indelible mark on the maritime law, shaping the way nations engage with international waters and trade. In many ways, piracy has transformed from a physical, tangible threat to one that exists in the shadows of cyberspace. Today, piracy is no longer just about seizing ships or gold, but about exploiting digital vulnerabilities and disrupting critical infrastructure. However, the spirit of piracy remains: a desire to challenge authority, a thirst for wealth, and a willingness to defy the established order. As we look toward the future, it is clear that piracy will continue to evolve. Whether through new technologies, shifting political landscapes, or the age-old pursuit of wealth and power, pirates will remain a part of our world, adapting to the times and leaving their mark on the seas, both physical and digital. The fight against piracy will require a blend of innovation, cooperation, and resilience. And the lessons learned from centuries of pirate history will guide us as we navigate the ever-changing waters of the modern world. So, as you go forth from this exploration of piracy, take with you the knowledge of its complex history, the heroes, the villains, the legends, and the realities. And perhaps the understanding that pirates will always be with us, in one form or another, from the bustling ports of ancient Greece to the digital seas of the 21st century. The legacy of piracy is a reminder of humanity's ongoing struggle for freedom, wealth, and power on the high seas. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the pirate-infested waters of history. Until next time, may you never sail too close to the danger of the pirate's way.